Welcome back to another episode of Dungeon Hammer, brought to you by One Mind Syndicate. I am your host, Gersh1, and I'm here with my two co-hosts,
Docile Creature.
And the Sound Alchemist.
And today we're going to be talking about how we can make combat more interesting. Your DM, or you as the DM, suck. And we are here to teach you how to make things better. So let's kick it off with why we think combat can get boring at most times. The thing within our D&D group that I've seen is that there's always like one or two players that once combat starts, the phones come out, because it just seems like it's a boring process for a lot of players. Why do you think that is?
I think the main thing is because it halts whatever storyline you're on. It is the break between chapters 1 and 2, or it's the transition between this thing happening and that thing happening. And it's almost like you're at a red light and you're just waiting for it to end so you could continue on with your journey.
Yeah, I think the main problem is, I mean, it's not a problem, it's just the way the game works, is it's turn-based combat. So when it's not your turn, you're kind of just waiting until it's your turn again. And it's hard to plan ahead when on one turn things can change drastically. On the turn before yours, everything can change and it can completely ruin your plans. So you can't really plan, but
right, yeah. And I think you guys hit it on the head. It's both for all those people who are interested in D&D for the role playing. You're not role playing, so that's kind of boring. Where, I mean, I guess you could argue. Well, we'll talk about how you can role play in combat, but then. And then the other thing is that you do have to wait your turn. And if there is a party of like 6 guys and gals, I guess, then you are waiting for what could be, because half the time, even though it's supposed to be, 3 seconds?
6 seconds.
6 seconds is supposed to represent 6 seconds. Let's be honest, half the people take a good 10 minutes trying to decide whether they're going to move or not.
Yeah.
So how do we combat that, guys?
I think it's going to be hard for newer players because my answer to that is learn your character, know what you're capable of, and know what you're not capable of, what you're good at, what you should be doing in combat, quote unquote, should.
This is coming from the barbarian whose only one task is to hit things in combat.
It's true. It's a lot more difficult for like wizards and stuff.
Oh, yeah,
you have a whole array of spells that you can cast in any certain moment.
Yeah, but that does show something that if you are a player and you start to see that your campaigns or your game's combat is boring, then you as a player have the power to tell everybody around you, and then you for yourself be prepared to, or know exactly what you want to do that pertains to the situation, I guess. So just be quicker in deciding on what you want to do.
As best as you can, yeah.
So as players in D&D, there is an etiquette that comes to combat, and that etiquette is use time management, right? And be respectful of the fact that there's other people at the table who want to participate in the same killing of the monster.
Right. And at the same time with that, it's like, don't try to be so flashy with every single action where it's like, oh, I want to jump from tree to tree and then do a backflip and slash him in the throat. It's like,
it's good for every once in a while, but not. It doesn't have to be that every combat.
Right.
Another thing that's kind of something they don't really think about is try not to distract the player whose turn it is.
Oh,
like if it's your turn, don't be like, oh, remember that one time we did this? That's completely unrelated to D&D, or maybe it is, but it's like, let the player, that's spotlight's on them, let them do their thing, and then once the turn's over, then you can talk to them about the whatever.
And that extends to people that it's not even their turn, because something in our group that I'm guilty of doing all the time is that when combat does start and it's someone's turn, I'm going to turn to the person next to me who's not in combat and talk to them. And half the time that conversation is more distracting than what's actually happening. Or what ends up happening is that the player whose turn it is does something, and nobody in the party paid attention to it because I was the dick who was talking while everybody, or while that one person is in combat. So again, back to player etiquette. Let the person who has the spotlight do their thing.
So the reason why all these things happen, do you think is just because combat in general is not exciting?
No.
Well, I feel like that can be a thing, not necessarily in general, but I think all of these things that we talked about are symptoms of combat not being interesting enough.
In a role-playing game, because we have the background of being 40K players, that's all combat, and we know that combat can be really, really entertaining.
But it's different in 40K because it's I'm shooting at you, not I take my crossbow and aim at your knee. It's different.
Well, it could be. It depends on the person. Again, it boils down to the fact. I think what you're trying to say is it a player flaw or is it a game flaw?
Right. I'm trying to say it's the game
flaw. Yeah, I don't think it's a game flaw.
No, because I've heard of different editions being better than what 5e is in combat.
It's always been turn-based, though, from what I've...
Because it's going to be too chaotic if everything's happening at once.
Yeah, it's hard to... Yeah, especially for one person, the DM who's running the combat. Right. You can't take in everybody's stuff at the same time and act on it.
I can take everybody's stuff in at the same time.
I would say, though, that it's definitely not the game... Like, the way that 5e represents combat, I really enjoy. Because it has that tactic that a war game would have, but then at the same time you can add role-playing elements, whereas like the other option would just be like skill-based combat, where like describe what you're doing and then roll me a skill check, which could be an alternative to you. That is one way of making combat.
Yeah, if you have like a party or a group of players that doesn't really like combat, that'd be a really nice way to streamline combat. It's like roll an athletics check. If you beat this, you hit it. Roll damage. That's it.
Yeah, but based on the game, though, I would not say that D&D is flawed for having a turn-based combat system the way that it does. Because I even feel that as a player, you have so many options with your movement, bonus action, and then your attack. Sometimes multi-attack. Well, always multi-attack for the barbarian because he's a douche.
Or any other combat-based class, but sure.
So I would say then definitely... it comes down to the player and the DM. Going back to the whole player, there are other things that you can do as a player to make combat a little more interesting. And one of them, I know you mentioned that it's not okay for you to every single turn be over the top and explaining what you're doing, but it is a good way to explaining exactly how you're slashing the monster is entertaining because everybody's in there to get invested into the world. If it's your turn and you say, I'm going to roll to see how much I hit and how much damage I do, next player's turn, that's kind of boring. But saying like, I'm going to come down with my sword and try to slice him through the forehead, that's more entertaining for the group.
Right, because now if he's wearing armor, the next person would be like, oh, I'm going to also try and aim at his forehead. And then maybe the DM would be like, oh, well, he's been hit there 3 times, so his AC is now lowered if you aim at that spot.
Yeah, but description is what I'm trying to get at.
I definitely think description is important, and it makes combat more interesting. It gets other players interested if you're describing things in a way, oh man, that's badass. Like he just did that really cool thing.
Yeah, instead of just watching dice roll.
Yes,
and you're fluffing up the ego of the DM too, because they're like, oh yeah, this guy's invested in my world, and then you that's where inspiration can come in.
As a DM, you don't have a badass character that you've been building up. So when your players do badass things, that's kind of the DM's reward in combat. I think what we were trying to say is not every turn has to be that.
Yeah.
Because combat is already a long process in the game. Sometimes it can be the whole session. And if every person every turn described their attack with a sword or whatever in detail, it would just add so much more time onto the combat.
Right. Where it's like, okay, we get it. You're hitting them with your sword.
Like if you're killing a bunch of little goblins, you probably don't need that every turn. But I mean, if you're going against the big boss, maybe every turn is that, because this is like where the culmination of the campaign and like you want it to be epic.
Right.
Yep. Now let's take that let's switch it over now to the DM. Because if you do have a party who enjoys being very descriptive, as a DM, if let's say you do throw a bunch of goo boys at them, aka goblins that reproduce, and they are being extremely descriptive of how they're killing these pointless 1 HP creatures, make combat shorter. I think the worst thing that you can do as a DM is if you have a part or if you have combat, make it longer than I would say 3 times around the table. It depends on the size of the party, but if your party is like 4 players, doing more than 3 times go or 3 rounds without changing up the monster, changing up the scenery, it could get monotonous. And it's just kind of like that's when you lose players' attentions. I feel.
Yeah, that's
What
an
do you guys
interesting
think?
way to keep it combat short and interesting. Can really keep everybody. I like that.
Yeah, because I think that's the number one thing that I've noticed. That sometimes if I feel that I'm not immersed in combat, it's because it's been too long.
I feel like there's other ways to enrich combat as well.
Right.
Most of the things that I brought is kind of things to do with the terrain and the battlefield itself.
Yes.
Making the battlefield interesting, I think, is one of the key things. I think it's the last thing DMs think about when they try to make a combat.
That's the first thing I think about.
That's good. I mean, it's
Yeah.
partly because the background.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's like before you set up 40K, you have to have your battle.
Interesting terrain.
And
Yeah.
it's the same way I think about D&D. It's like, all right, so my characters are on this board and they're going to be fighting. It's like, I need to know, like, oh, there's a tree here they can climb. There's a trap on this part next to this bush. It's like, if they just walk up, I'm like, oh, there's a trap right there. Are they really going to believe me, or are they going to think, oh, I just made that up on the fly?
Yep.
So that's why I feel like terrain and, like you were saying, just having that landscape there improves not only just combat, but overall the immersion for the players.
And it's harder to do on spontaneous combats, but for combats that you have planned,
Right.
I think having the terrain in which it happens be interesting, like that's equally as important as whatever they're fighting. Yeah.
And what have you guys experienced, either as DM or players, in terms of like scenery? What scenarios have you guys been a part of that really made you say, "Wow, that the way they set up the terrain was pretty badass"?
Well, the only thing I can think of right now is once I was in a game and we were fighting a dragon, and the DM made the dragon be able to like raise up lava because we were kind of like in a cave with lava all around, and they used like the lava pools and the dragon would raise them up so that it would get higher and higher and higher every time. And if we didn't find a way to get off the ground, playing the floor is lava in D&D basically, then we would take damage or whatever. And it also creates an interesting trap, I guess, that if you want to use that pool of lava against your enemies, or if they want to use it against you, it's there.
That's interesting. Yeah. For me, I think it was the Sound Alchemist. He ran a combat scenario where we were attacked by, I think it was angels, but the main point was to find a magical item inside these crystals that were littered all over the battlefield, and but at the same time we're being attacked by an angel. So then it becomes a combat scenario with a twist. The twist is that there's something hidden in the terrain.
That's something I can think make combat really important, is to have alternate win conditions. Like, you're not just there, you guys fight until the other people are dead. Like having something trapped in the crystal that we have to break open, and once we get that, we win, quote unquote.
Right.
Or having, hey, you're the wizard of the party, you have to do this ritual. We have to protect you for, the DM will say 10 rounds, and after that, the ritual is complete, and you guys teleport away or something like that.
Yeah.
So just hordes and hordes of things are going to come at you, and you have to just survive that long.
Yeah.
Right. There was this one session where I was essentially building Mousetrap, but like the board game Mousetrap, but in a D&D-esque style. And as soon as they walked into the room, they were already trying to explore. It's like, well, stop, just like wait. You got to wait for your characters to be in there, because if you figure out the thing, like the main attraction for your terrain, like let's say you have everything pointed into like, you have key points in the form of like a pentagram, then they're going to be like, oh, well, this is obviously like a demonic, sacrifice or something like that. So the way I like to set up my terrain is to make it almost seem not man-made, like everything's natural. That way certain surprises and certain traps and stuff like that don't stick out right away to the player, so that their characters don't already know what's to come.
So in that combat scenario, you were throwing puzzles, basically,
Essentially a puzzle during combat.
and then you're making it not as or you were trying to hide it, basically.
Right.
That's
And
cool.
the other thing on it too is everybody had a minute as a time limit for their turn. So if you're in combat, obviously you're not going to have like all the time in the world to think, okay, so I've got this guy coming after me from behind, but there's, like you said, lava raising up, and I got to figure out where this stone fits on this, wall. It's like so many things are coming at you that you wouldn't have all this time to think about it. And that's when the time limit really kind of forces you to say, okay, so combat's not as important right now, so I'm going to focus on just firing my arrow, but then use my movement to get to where I need to. So that way it's almost like you're thinking ahead, but still focusing, but still having combat be that pressure that kind of makes you make that decision.
Time is definitely another cool aspect to play around with.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to get like a little 30-second or a minute-long hourglass and be like, at the end of this, your turn's over no matter what you do.
Right.
Now, since you brought that up, I was going to bring this up when we were talking about player time and how like you're supposed to respect how much time you take in deciding on what your action is. Would you ever, as a DM, take out a little timer and say you have this much time to decide?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Especially in those tense situations, or if your players just notoriously take a long time in combat and you
Right.
want to speed things up or train them to move faster. It's like, when this is done, your turn is over.
No matter what.
Yeah, no matter what.
That sounds pretty
But
cool.
at the same time, it might also be a little like disrespectful. Like, oh, like it's not my fault. I don't know how to play this character.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
you
at
would
the
have
same
to
time,
be a
it is.
little forgiving to new
Yeah.
players in this situation.
Yeah. Going back to the terrain before I forget, another thing that I think the Sound Alchemist did was remember when we were in the underwater,
No.
the underwater world, and we were supposed to find like an artifact, but at the same time we were being attacked by, what was it, a kraken?
Yeah, something like that.
What cool, or have you guys ever thought of cool terrain conditions that affect that could affect a party? So in your situation, it was swimming, and
You had to hold your breath.
Yeah. So that was one thing, and then there also your vision was obscured in that scenario. But what other cool things have you guys experienced?
I think just having like cool weather in general could be kind of cool. Like if you're in combat and it's really windy or like raining, then your arrows aren't going to fly straight because you're. I mean, it's.
Yeah, since it's 2019, obviously not.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, like using the weather as well, not just having it be sunny all the time or cloudy.
And also, it doesn't always have to be a negative, right?
Yeah.
Right. Just like in Pokemon, if it's a sunny day, maybe everything's dry and your fire does more damage.
Your solar beam goes off on one turn instead of two.
Yeah. So keep that in mind too. What other cool, interesting things have you guys done for combat?
What about magical items? Do you think they improve combat or make it more like it takes the fun away?
No, I think it always improves. If you ever feel that your player is getting past a monster because of a magical item, it goes back to that whole like.
It's on the DM's fault for making that magical item. So
well, not only that, like, but also like you have to think on the fly as a DM. Like if for some reason this magical item is making it too easy to kill something, you always have the tools because you're God to create a tougher scenario if you want to.
That, and it also just makes your players more cool.
Yeah,
like
it makes them feel
you
better.
have this really difficult situation. They're like, oh, I'm just use this magic item that I got. We're done. Like if you want to, or dimension door through a wall and get through the whole dungeon in 30 minutes, then I mean it just makes your players feel more powerful.
Yeah,
that's always
true.
a good thing.
right. I mean, it sucks that you spent 3 days trying to make the dungeon, but hey, they worked around.
That's
it.
D&D.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I gave my characters probably one of the strongest weapons I've ever made, which is a mace infused with like god energy that has 3 charges that can literally kill anything as long as you hit it. It doesn't matter how many HP they have left. It doesn't matter if it's a building. As long as they hit something and they use a charge, it is erased from existence. And I'm like, well, let's see what they do with this. they haven't used it yet.
I was gonna say that's probably what I would do.
Right.
I would just save it for the big bad.
But that's the thing.
So you can't ever recharge that then?
No, you have 3
okay.
charges and that's it. But the enemies could steal it and use it on you.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
interesting.
And that's a way as a DM that you do make it, or you go around something that you created in the past. Because now if your party does hide or try to, or doesn't use that, now you do have somebody who's trying to swipe that.
Right.
A fox out there who's trying to take the mace.
No swiping.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I'm just surprised. I would have thought that they'd at least use it once by now, but
I would use it on a player.
that'd be interesting.
That would be brutal.
Yeah. It's like, I don't like you anymore.
Yep.
Erased.
Erased.
And then all you have to do is hit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's not even like the blades of corn where you have to get a 5+.
Nope. As easy as hitting something. And it's funny because like the druid had this mace and like her strength is one of like her lowest things.
Oh.
So if she were to use it, it'd be like at a -1.
Oof.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like, why does she have this?
I've ran into stuff like that when players get magical items that seemed like they were meant for other players, but they're like, nope, this is mine. It's like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah. How do you feel about that though? Like people using weapons just because it's cool, but not because it fits their play style or class or race.
I think it depends on how they came about the weapon or whatever it is.
And you're just supposed to let that role play out.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't think you should intervene as a DM and be like, actually, I meant that item to go to him, so if you can just give him that item.
Yeah.
Because that's favoritism.
That's just
And
like,
then grudges build up. Right, docile creature?
right.
Yeah, we're secretly creating our own movie of The Grudge.
What's the difference between the grudge and the ring? Anyways.
The ring can put her leg over her head, so that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, the Grudge
If you're
isn't
into that kind of
as
thing.
flexible.
That reminds me, in combat, have you guys ever ran a scenario where like your player can hit a certain body part?
No.
No.
Well, not normally. Like it took this person almost dying, and like I think I mentioned it before, not on a podcast, but there's a scenario where they're fighting a spider demon, and this character, she's all by herself. She's down to like less than half of her hit points, and she's all coiled up in the spider demon's webs. But this spider demon, he's trying to follow a Buddhist god, and it granted him the power of like sight, but it took away its sight, so that what it sees isn't plagued by reality in a way. So she used, I believe it was either lesser or greater restoration to bring sight to this creature. So she targeted obviously his eyes, and from having no eyes for like pretty much the longest time, this influx of visual senses made him stagger enough for her to break out and flee. So I thought that was pretty interesting, using a spell that's normally used to heal against the big bad and a specific body part that was really out of the box, and I should have given her inspiration for that.
Definitely. That's a really cool way to
Yeah.
get through that situation. I don't usually tend to let people say, I'm going to aim for their head, because realistically, in a fight, you're always going to be aiming for vital body parts.
Mm-hmm.
And your roll or their hit points determine how successful you are. Like,
So you're saying it's out of the ordinary for somebody to get like a arrow straight through the middle of the eyes on the first time?
No, I
in
think
D&D, yes.
Okay.
Just for the that's just how the game works. Unless it's like a goblin or whatever, or
So
just
even
a
if they
guard.
like crit or anything like that?
It depends on what you're fighting. Like if you're on crits, it's a little different. I don't know. If they one shot kill it or whatever, then yeah. But normally that doesn't happen.
because that is something that I think I've been tempted to try to create a monster where like it's like a monster with multiple heads, and really it comes down to, well, which head are you gonna kill? Because that's the important part.
Obviously the lower one, right?
Yeah.
Eee.
The long, skinny one.
Speak for yourself.
But yeah, that's just another option to spice things up, make combat a little different. Where like, okay, now tell me exactly how you're gonna do it.
Yeah, it's funny because like the player who's playing Link in my campaign, yes, he's playing Link from Hyrule. He always picks a body part. It's like, oh, this character's got a sword. Well, let me aim for his wrist so he can maybe,
That's cool.
drop his sword. He does this a lot, actually. Now that I think about it.
As a DM, I think you should reward out of the box thinking like that.
The way I reward it is like usually it doesn't go unless he rolls like above an 18 or something like that.
Oh, okay.
I think the way I would handle his crits would be mildly successful in doing what, unless you're saying I want to cut off his head every turn. And
Right.
then when you roll a crit, okay, his head comes off. Because like I said, in combat, you are always trying to, well, not always, but if you're trying to kill somebody, you're going to be aiming for the parts that will kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And their success in dodging and your success in hitting, that's where attack rolls and hit points come in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird to be like, I aim for the head. Okay, you hit the head. Even because I've seen people do like, okay, -5 to the attack. But then what if you do that to a big bad?
Mm-hmm.
And then, you hit. Even with the -5,
Yeah.
you cut off their head. And that's kind of anticlimactic if it's early on in the combat session.
Gotcha.
Well, I was going to say,
Yes.
Hydras in 5e have a mechanic kind of like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
except for it's just however much damage you do. I think it's like 25 damage takes off a head.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't necessarily have to say, I'm going to cut off the head, but every time you do 25 damage, it takes one off kind of thing.
Yeah. The monster that I'm building is based off of a Hydra.
Yeah.
And it has a mechanic like that, but slightly different.
Hmm.
But again, playing with the monster and trying to build a monster that's not just basically what did you say, an HP bag?
Bag of hit points.
There
yeah.
you go. Yeah.
My bag's a Louis Vuitton, by the way.
Ooh.
Another thing too that you can do and that would be a little interesting is maybe not killing the person that you're in combat with. The whole point of this thing, of this fight, is not even to knock him out, but also to like find a way to capture this giant monster that's lashing out in like the city square or something. Because then it does make your players look around and say, well, how can we capture this big baddie?
Yeah. Messing around with the monster stats or abilities can be kind of interesting, like making them immune to magic or immune to all types of bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, whatever. Flipping that on its head was like, okay, we can't, or maybe they're just immune to damage, but they don't really do any damage. So it's kind of like, how do we take this thing out before, because we can't really physically affect it. Right. How can we overcome the situation without the normal means, which is hitting it over and over again?
And there's a monster already that is like that, right? The giant reptilian thing that lives underground. There's only one of them in D&D.
The Tarrasque.
There you go. Because nothing hurts it, right? It can't die.
It can die. It can definitely die. There's ways to do it, but it's not super easy, I guess. Mm-hmm. I haven't ever fought one or looked into the stats too much, but...
And that brings me to an interesting question here. So seeing as how both of you seem pretty knowledgeable with the monster manual, does that take away the fun of being in combat? Because it's like, oh, I'm fighting a goblin. I know this goblin's stats, like the back of my hand.
Yes. For me, it does take away.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks, but I get in my own head if I'm fighting a troll or whatever. And like the classic thing for trolls is you can only kill with fire damage or whatever, or otherwise it keeps regenerating. And if as a player,
spoiler alert,
as a player, you have to think about if your character would know that and kind of act accordingly if you do that. I think one way as a DM to get around stuff like that is reskinning and completely changing the abilities of monsters. Like there's nothing in the rule, like it's D&D, you can do that. You can say this troll heals with fire and the only way you can kill it is with ice. And if a player says, oh, actually it's supposed to be fire, you're like, oh, it's a different kind of troll.
Right.
Like it's...
Yeah, that's what I've noticed too, because in scenarios where I know the monster, the creature, half of the time it just bugs me that the DM is not running it the way that the book is running it. But then I remember that I've never played with any DM that has taken information from the book. Like it's always like things that they make up. So even if I know that they're weak to fire, odds are like the DM changed it up in a certain way. So I wouldn't say that it bothers me. I think it's just something that I quickly learned that just because it's in the monster manual doesn't mean that it's going to be the way that it is. Kind of like that 500 HP dragon, right?
Yep. Yeah.
It's just something that you kind of have to shed the monster manual and sometimes even the player guide and just be like, well, it's up to whatever the DM says.
Yeah.
You can not only change the abilities, you also change the way it looks completely. Like if you describe this troll as a blob of goo that's so like massing towards you, they're not going to say, "Oh, it's a troll, hit it with fire." They got to learn how this thing dies a brand new way. They might figure it out after the fact, like, "Oh, that was just a troll, but it looked different."
Yep.
But I mean, what are they going to say? Like that's not going to be necessarily a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I would say though is that having the monster manual is a huge advantage because of all the different already built-in interesting mechanics that you can play.
Yeah.
Like you were mentioning with the Hydra. So reading the descriptions of each monster and then just thinking of how you could implement that in your own combat has been like awesome for me.
And going back to terrain, think about how, like, if your players are going into this creature's lair, what kind of terrain would that creature make its lair that would be advantageous to its abilities?
Yep.
Like if this thing is flying, then maybe they're high up in the sky, or they're in a rock face that is super difficult to climb, but it's a little alcove that they live in. So if you want to get to this thing, you have to battle the elements or terrain in some way so that to get there in the first place, and then you are on this thing's home turf. It made its home here for a reason. It's going to use its abilities, and it's going to have an advantage that you guys don't have.
Yeah.
Another thing that kind of ties into that is using all three dimensions in a combat. Like, don't just think of it as a horizontal plane that you guys are fighting on.
The x-axis.
Sure.
And the y.
Yep.
And the z.
Yep.
Z is time.
Let your players know that there's this big tree that's easily climbable or a cliff that they can get up.
I just want to say thank you for that. Z is time.
I'm saying in combat.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure our listeners really appreciated that.
Sorry, guys.
Z is time from now on.
Playing around with the lair, though, is a lot of fun. Also, don't be afraid as a DM to have your monster run away.
Oh, I'm always afraid.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't. Because having a really powerful monster and having your party slowly pick away at it, it could be fun. We talked about this during, I think it was the demon episode, or it was the our horror episode. But having a monster that follows you will flip it over.
Yeah.
A monster that you follow.
You're chasing it through the jungle, trying to kill it, and it just wants to survive. And I think most creatures, monsters, people, whatever, they're not just going to say, all right, I'm making my stand here. I'm going to fight you until one of us is dead.
That's true, yeah.
Most of them will be like, oh, crap, these guys are beating the crap out of me. I'm not getting out of here because I want to live.
Yeah. I mean, just think of, like, animals in real life. Like,
yeah.
They're almost all the time not even going to fight. They're just going to run.
You'll be a big old bear, you get an air horn, and then they run.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, yeah.
Stupid bears.
They don't have nightmares.
No.
Just like docile creature.
I am the nightmares.
He is the nightmares. What other cool things have you guys experienced that twist combat around?
I think the one thing that doesn't happen too often is not killing whatever you're fighting. I feel like too many people think, oh, we're in combat, we have to kill it.
Murder hoboism.
Yeah.
As a DM, you can, like we just said, make the monster run away. But as a player, what do you think you can do?
Because you always have the option, when you bring them down to 0 hit points, you can always knock them out.
Okay.
You don't have to kill them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it makes sense, then I definitely think that's underutilized.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you say, oh, I go to, like, decapitate him, but I'm not trying to kill him, I'm trying to knock him out. Obviously, that's not a thing.
Something that I've done as a DM to try to combat that, very early on, one of my players, our DM, was playing a newer character. He had a few sessions under his belt, and if somebody ever like talked shit to him, they would die.
He would attack them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not necessarily like in the middle of the street, but if sliding it in any way, he'd be like, "Oh, I want to kill that guy."
Mm-hmm.
And there was combats where they would fight things, and he would always want to kill them. And then one time he had this guy dead to rights. He was up against a tree with his hands up, and he pulls back his bow. I said, I shoot him. I said, he's like, oh, wait, to try to make it like more impactful. Like, and then he felt bad. He's like, oh, dude, I shouldn't have killed that guy. Like, that was messed up.
Yeah.
Make it more
personable.
Yeah. Pull on the heartstrings a little bit.
What kind of heartstring is that?
The docile creature is just making a gesture of a skinny. Never mind.
But yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. Like, say you're fighting a band of pirates, and you go to deliver the final blow, and as you bring your sword down, the pirate puts his hand up to block, and it's like you hit his locket, and down you see like the picture of his wife and family.
So I was gonna say, I've done this a lot where they're killing bandits. And they're like, oh, I want to loot them. You find a note that's a drawing and it says daddy on it. And it's like a drawing of them in like and whatever, coal or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't really usually affect my players, but
just like, whatever. He's dead now.
Burn it.
You won't have a daddy to see anymore.
That is good though. Humanizing the monsters that that your party is killing is
right.
That's huge in general. I think for your big bads, I think they should have reasonable motivations for what they're doing.
Don't just let them be a
mustache twirling. I want to destroy the world.
Lie
just
because...
for no reason. Yeah, because I'm an evil person. But I mean, the counter argument is there is an alignment chart in this game if you choose to play it with evil things like demons and stuff. So there is actually evil, but it's less interesting. To me, at least, when your bad guy is just a bad guy for whatever guy reasons.
So you're saying you like things when there's 50 Shades of Grey of it?
At least 50.
Oh,
Whip me, daddy.
I think that's for the DM to do.
Oh, sorry.
What other things have you guys?
Well, you mentioned something that we still haven't got to yet, and I want to see what you want to say. You mentioned role playing during combat. Like, where were you trying to go with that?
Oh, well, making... I guess it ties to the description part, where if you are a person that really likes the role-playing aspect of it, don't kill the monster that you're trying to fight. Stop. Try to negotiate. Or vice versa. If you're the DM, this is exactly what you were saying, though, right now, where you make the monster... you humanize the monster, and on his turn, he actually doesn't try to attack you, but instead tries to communicate something with the party. And then all of a sudden, it does become a combat scenario where everybody has an initiative, but instead of attacking, you are talking. Yeah. Which has happened in our player group. It can be boring because then it's everybody. I mean, what is it? 6 seconds? What are you going to say in 6 seconds? But it is like another way to introduce role playing.
And to end combat, like if everybody says, oh, we're just going to talk, and then the enemy agrees, that ends combat, and then you can have a conversation as much as you want.
Then you could kill him without him fighting back.
And another thing that I just thought of is a way to kind of train, I guess, your players to not just kill everything is don't use experience points.
Oh, definitely.
We've all been in a campaign where experience points were the
only way to level up.
Which is, I mean, it's either usually experience or milestone. And we just always wanted to kill everything because that's how we're going to level up. That's
we were level 1, and he introduced what was it?
Cloud
Giant, which is like one of the strongest things around.
So, because now that I've thought about that, I think that came down to the fact that he was a new DM and he didn't know too much. But
yes,
if you do decide to do...
But no, I'm saying this was on us, because it's like, oh, here's a huge Cloud Giant. He's going to give us tons of XP.
What the DM should have done, though, is let the giant kill a player.
Absolutely.
Then all of a sudden you realize, oh shit, yeah, we can gain experience points, but we have to win, and in order to do that, like, we need to size these guys up correctly. Which is something that doesn't happen in a non or in the other way. So if you milestone way. Because if you do milestones, I feel the story drives the game, and then in that situation, I feel like I'm invincible. I can do whatever I want. The DM is not really, unless I go super crazy, the DM is not going to throw something at me that's going to be able to kill me. Whereas if you do the other way, then I could attack a wolf and the wolf could maul me to death, which is what happened in that same campaign.
Yeah.
I should have died.
He should have, yeah. You got mauled to death, and then the person who was trying to help you, he rolled a nat 1, shot an arrow right at you.
Yeah, and I think in that situation, if the DM would have been like, "Yeah, he's dead," then it all of a sudden like a wave of fear strikes everybody, and it's like, you check yourself before you guys try to fight.
Yeah, because you're going to wreck yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely think about, depending on what kind of campaign you want to have, whether to use XP or milestone. But XP can do a good thing too, is if we thought of some cool way to take down that cloud giant, like a super creative way, like lure him into this cave, collapse the cave. Imagine how much experience we would have got.
Yeah, right off.
But then he'd be like, you guys technically didn't kill him. The rocks falling on him.
I mean,
him.
we would have to do something way more creative than
Yeah.
that. But I mean, if we did pull it off,
The only time I felt that fighting wasn't an option was in that campaign was when we had that like group of mercenaries come our way.
yeah,
Yeah, but I think that was also like a new DM type of thing where like, I think even the party wanted to fight.
Yeah.
And then they were like, well, no, you can't. He just straight up said you can't.
Did it?
I think so.
I don't remember.
But again, it all boils down to how you handle it, and you have to throw a bunch of combat scenarios at a party and then learn from that,
Yeah,
because it boils down to
knowing your players.
yeah.
And also something that I just remembered was in that same campaign there were fighting pits.
That was fun.
It was fun, but for those who were fighting.
Oh, okay, yeah. Go ahead, explain that part.
So after we got captured by that group that I previously mentioned, we got taken to this village and like, okay, you could fight for your freedom or whatever. So 3 of us were put into the fighting pits. 2 of us weren't. And that's basically a waste of a scenario for the 2 that aren't.
And to clarify, the people in the fighting pits were put in there for committing crimes.
Right.
So the people that did not commit crimes were not in the pits.
So essentially you're rewarding those who are criminals.
Not only that, but they got into fights, which gave them XP, which leveled them up.
Yeah.
While the people who didn't commit crimes were kind of just sitting there like, oh man, maybe we should commit some crimes.
Yeah,
so we can get
you
thrown in
guys
the
were
pit.
thinking of jumping into the pits.
I did
Yeah.
jump into the pit just because I was like, hey, I want to get some experience, and then I got my ass kicked because I was a
Right.
squishy sorcerer. But
Yeah. And even that, it was just one person at a time.
Yeah, and
Like
yeah.
even if you were thrown into the pit, only one
Right.
person could fight.
so the rest of the whole people, everybody sitting at the table just had to watch as
Mm-hmm.
you fought one-on-one versus a thing, got experience, leveled
Yeah.
up.
And the thing about that is everybody's vying to do the final blow. Because I think we were doing it where whoever killed it got the experience. It wasn't a team thing.
Oh, really?
Because at one point I was a higher level than the rest of you guys.
Well, that was because of the pits.
Oh, because I fought first.
Yeah, you
that's
fought a
why.
bunch of times in the pits, and
yeah.
you were like level 3 or 4.
Right.
Everybody else was level 2.
Yeah, you guys are still 2, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I do remember that he did make us share because when we did kill the wolves, I was knocked out and I still got experience points. But that is another flaw to the XP because if you have a party of 5 compared to a party of like 3, I'm pretty sure they'll level up quicker if it's a party of 3 because they're getting more experience out of the monster because it's not being divided equally, right?
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother issue with that way of leveling characters up. That's, I guess, for another topic.
Yeah.
So what we can gather though from the fighting pits is that if you do run a combat scenario, try your best to get the entire party involved.
Yes.
Especially if like there's a rogue that goes ahead and they do start a fight, find a way to get to either end that fight right away or get the party to get in on it, I guess. Not that happens that often.
Yeah, but I mean,
Right. If it happens, then yeah, it's kind of... Because you're essentially playing...
kind of on the players. At
Yeah,
that
because
point.
the DM's playing essentially 2...
One person.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
playing a one-person fight with the rogue, and then he's playing with the other
Yeah.
rest of them. Yeah, splitting your party's never good.
Yeah.
It's the number 1 rule D&D. Don't split the party.
And then just because... Oh, go ahead.
I'd say number 1 rule on horror movies, too.
Yeah.
it's true.
And never mind. And one thing that I wanted to mention because it kind of fits with this situation, and I don't think we can create a standalone video for it. As a player, it's important to enter D&D with the knowledge that sometimes you're just going to sit and watch, and sometimes
Yes.
it might be a little longer than you're comfortable with, but you need to get invested in whatever combat is happening. So if the rogue does get captured, and then it is just a one-on-one between the DM and the rogue, sit back and watch and view it as a kind of like a play.
Yeah. Care about the characters the other characters at the table that aren't you,
Right?
and be interested when that other character's in danger when your character isn't necessarily involved.
Yeah.
Just be polite enough to do that and hope that they do the same when the reverse, and you're on your own and they just have to watch you be in the spotlight.
And it's something that you have to practice too. It's not something that's going to come quick, especially like for us because we.
I always come quick.
Because well, from a war game perspective, it is just my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. So there's something always happening that involves you as a player. Whereas in role playing games, that might not be the case. So it's something that you slowly have to come to terms with.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you're chained up and it's the other person in control.
Yeah, sometimes you're the sub, sometimes you're the dom.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. But I was thinking, like, if you're chained up in a dungeon and now you can't do anything but watch, now the DM has his time with the rest of the party members.
That's another thing that you can do is like capture a party member and
almost like
put their life on the line.
Yeah. Almost have it like make that person care. Like, let's say he's interrogating the other party members, but based on what that party member does or say, it interferes directly to you.
Oh, that would be really cool to twist it into
So even though you can't
too.
do anything, it's going to come all back to you. So you have to pay attention.
Yeah. It would be kind of cool too, because I was just thinking in the Space Marines, the Imperial Fist have this thing called the
Power Glove?
The Power Glove or the Iron Glove or something like that.
Pain Glove.
Pain Glove. There
Pain
you
glove.
go. So they wear it, and it's supposed to be a way to.
I got one of those.
It's a way to like what is it called? What do they call it?
Flag or
Penance.
flog? Yeah.
It's like a penance thing.
Yeah.
It would be cool to put that on a player that's misbehaving and like throw a combat at a party, and all the damage that's being done to the monster is now being done to the player, and then all of a sudden the party finds out about this and they see that the player is getting hurt every time they hurt the monster, but the monster's still attacking the party. Figure it out.
Then they see this is the chance to get rid of that player. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
that could be. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, hey, maybe this player's into that kinky
It's
stuff.
like we don't see that happening. Keep attacking the monster.
But yeah, there's a lot of ways to.
Aim lower.
There's a lot of ways to make interesting combat. I guess you just have to be creative.
Yeah, that's the main thing about D&D. Creativity.
Think about it more than just you versus them on a flat plane.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really the worst thing.
Because Z is time.
Exactly.
That was my line, but yes. So remember to
Don't go off script, Ben.
Yeah.
Who?
Yeah, if you guys have any other suggestions as to how you can make combat entertaining and fun, if you've experienced fun combat, comment down in the comment section below. We'll talk to you guys in the comment section below, right, guys?
Right.
Right.
We'll do that.
This has been Gershwin.
The Sound Alchemist.
Docile creature.
And we'll be seeing you in the next one.
Oh, if you could put my freedom